Yo YouTube, Brewski here, and I've had a lot of comments and I've seen a lot of things on a couple Facebook pages about how you thin paint. I'm going to show you 2 ways that you can actually do this, and as an added bonus, you're actually going to learn how to make your own wet palette in this video. Okay guys, so here we are. I'm going to show you how to thin down your paints using 2 methods. One of them is going to be using a dry palette like this one, and the other one I'm going to show you how to make a wet palette and how that actually works. So I'm just going to use these Necron Scarabs. I've been perfecting my paint job. I'm just going to use those as a dummy run here. And I'm not so much concerned about the color I'm putting on. I'm just showing you how I actually will thin paints with this. So you can see these guys all have yellow, orange, but they're not all exactly the same shade. I'm going to correct that. So give your paint a good shake first, as always. Now with this method, I'm just using Reaper Miniatures paints here. I really like the Reaper line. I love dropper bottles just for the economy of them. Very handy. So I'm going to show you in one of the darker spots right here. You just put a little bit of paint into that spot. So you can see I just threw that in right here. Okay. Then all you do is you take your brush and you just get it in your water and drag it through the paint. And it shows up probably pretty well here because I'm doing this on a black background, but you can also, not sure how well you can see this, but it helps you to make a pretty fine point. And part of the reason you do this is you're controlling the point on the brush, but you get the consistency, you feel how it paints, and you add a little more, a little less water, depending if you're trying to make a glaze or just thin the paint. But that's a really simple way to do it. It gives you the right amount on your brush, and you can just go right in and start painting your model and give it the color you want. Like this will dry out over time, and you'll notice that the paint will, sometimes the thinner portions where you've spread it out will dry faster. I don't always have that happen, so it's just something you're gonna have to feel out and learn with the paints you're using and get used to how much water you have to use, how little, and all the ranges are different. If you use Citadel, if you use Reaper, if you use Army Painter, if you use P3, they're all a little bit different. So some of this is learned by doing. Some of this is, you know, there is no wax on, wax off. So you're gonna have to feel that out. Okay, so that is how you do a hard palette and thin paints just by adding water. It's that simple. And you can use mediums, you can use, you know, gloss medium glazes. Some specific products, like if you're using Citadel Contrast, will have their own medium, and you may use those instead of just water. But if you're just using straight up acrylic paint, water is more than fine. So now, let's say you want to do the wet palette approach. Well, I'm going to show you how to make a dirt cheap wet palette. You're going to need a couple of things. You need some kind of a Tupperware container, and I recommend a thin one like this. And you do want to have a lid. Some people have suggested using this as the bottom of the palette and put this part on top of it. That's fine. You don't really have to. So you need some kind of a sealable container. You need good old paper towel. Some people will use microfibers or rags or even sponges. You don't have to. You can just use paper towel. The last thing you need is parchment paper. Okay, this is not wax paper. This is not cheesecloth. This is parchment paper. It's a baking paper, and it's not exactly waterproof, which is exactly what we want. Okay. Now, you could buy wet palettes. Several different companies make them. If you want to spend that much money and you want to buy the exact parts that they need, go right ahead. But all told, I got probably 3 of these containers for, I think, less than $5 US. I got a whole box, and I forget how much space, how much footage, but a box of parchment paper was, I don't know, $2 and change. And paper towel you can literally get when you go get a burger. It's just, come on, it's a no-brainer. Okay, and As a note, the reason you want a lid, and a lot of people will say the reason for a wet palette is so that you can paint and then cover it up when you're done painting, and your paints will still be wet and you can come back to it and use it again. I don't really care about that. I just like the fact that it thins your paints and it makes them go longer. And unlike the hard palette, the dry palette, they don't dry out, which is really kind of handy just for the time you're painting. I don't really care about, you know, days later. You're not using that much paint. So step one is you get your container, just lay that down, okay? Step two is you put the sponge or the cloth or the paper towel in the bottom and just get it to sit as flush as you can. And then you put your parchment paper right on top of that. And you want to cut it roughly to fit, and you don't want it to roll and curl so that the pieces are not in contact. This'll go better when it's wetter. You can see it's kind of, you know, it's not exactly sitting totally flush, but we don't really care. If you have one of these kind of spray bottles, it's really handy at this point because you can just kind of spray and you'll see the water kind of collect on top, and you just roll it around like this, or, you know, use your finger and spread it around that way. Ideally, you want some of this to go through and go down into the paper towel underneath. And if you really want, lift it up and just see, you know, shake it off like that so it starts getting wet, or even just spray this. Not super wet, but like that, and it will go through. It's not waterproof paper. It will absorb into it. You don't want water to bead on top of the parchment paper. And the reason for that is because you're gonna put your paint right on here. If the water is beading up there, it's gonna be too wet, and your paint is just going to, you'll see it kind of, you know, spread out and get really, really, really thin, more so than you actually want. So that is the no-no there. So once you get that done, and once this is just a little bit damp, give this a little more. And just kind of spread that around. Okay, so once this is damp, and we'll see how good or bad I've done this. It's not an expert process. You get used to it as you do it. Take your paint and get a blob on there. And you'll notice that it's not, this is not just, you know, spreading out and getting all veiny. It's really just kind of sitting there. Okay, you can take your brush and go right on. You don't stick this in the water and then in the paint, because the water is on the parchment paper. And see right there, we've already got a really good point on the brush. And consistency wise, it's just about what we want. And again, I know I'm going over the same kind of color here, but you'll see it's exactly the right consistency. It's not spreading around, it's not too runny. And there we go. That is how you make a wet palette, and that is how you would thin paint using the wet palette method. Now again, you can just close this up when you're done and leave this sitting. Provided you don't live in the middle of the Sahara Desert, you should be able to, you know, a couple hours later or a day later, pop this off and your paint will still have a little bit of moisture to it. Test it, learn how often that works or how long it stays for you, and see what you can do with it. Personally, there's pros and cons to both methods. I prefer the wet palette. It's a little more work, it's a little more whatever, but I prefer this because you use more of the paint you put down. You don't get the dried up effect that you do on a hard palette. I like the fact you can even blend right on this two colors and it will be way smoother. And again, it doesn't dry out on you. And the best thing about the cheap DIY method is this is all really inexpensive. I've literally got this container, which will be fine for as long as I need it. Paper towel is replaceable. The parchment paper I have, I could make 100 of these sheets out of that roll. I'm not going through them that fast, so that will last me quite a while. And you're not spending, you know, 30 bucks on a palette set. You're not spending 20 bucks on the refills of the pads or whatever it is. Yes, arguably those might work better. The texture might be better. I don't really care. I'm working on a budget and limited time and I don't feel like waiting and ordering, I would rather just make something like this that's totally workable for all of $5 and move on with my life and get painting, which is what I'm telling you to do. And there you have it. So I showed you how to make a wet palette, how to use a dry palette, and how to thin down your paints 2 ways. It's that simple, that easy. This is really nothing super complicated. Anyone can do it. You just have to feel out your paints and learn how to do it by there. Learn by doing, guys. There is no wax on, wax off. So I hope that was helpful. If you like this, subscribe to see more videos. Leave a like, leave a comment if you have a more specific question. I'd be happy to answer those. And I'll see you guys on the next video. Stay savage.